to Coast program for you today, and we begin on the road to Tallahassee.
State lawmakers, their annual session begins in just 9 days, and from all indications, it's going to be a doozy. The governor and speaker of the House, both Republicans, have been feuding for weeks over funding for Enterprise Florida and Visit Florida. These are two agencies that get millions of dollars from taxpayers.
The governor wants those agencies fully funded. The House Speaker wants them gone. He calls it corporate welfare. And we begin right there with State Representative Jose Felix Diaz is a Republican representing District 116 from Doral to Kendall. He chairs the House Regulatory Affairs Committee. And State Senator Oscar Brannen is a Democrat from Miami Gardens and the minority leader in the state Senate. He represents District 35, which includes South Central Broward and North Central Miami-Dade. Good morning.
Gentlemen, great to have you come in. Yes. Representative, let me begin with your point of view and then we'll get to Senator Brannen. But here we've got this feud between the governor and your leader, House Speaker Richard Corcoran, tough, smart guy, who says that the money for Visit Florida, which promotes tourism, Enterprise Florida, which provides tax incentives, obviously, for businesses to come or stay here, he says that's corporate welfare. The governor says nonsense. We need it. How's that going to work out?
Well, I think it's a good indication that at this point in session, all we're fighting about is, you know, a couple millions of dollars in the budget. We're not talking about a budget that hasn't been balanced. We're talking about we're not talking about any issues with the way that the government is working. We're focusing on $80 million in an $80 billion budget. And as a matter of fact, this year, this week, the speaker took a big step forward and actually said, okay, we're not going to gut Visit Florida. There was an amendment done in the House Appropriations Committee to save Visit Florida, just cut their budget a little bit.
But isn't this about more the concept of paying business incentive versus the execution? I mean, especially with Visit Florida, I think we talked about on this program the pit bull debacle, where, you know, to Pitbull's credit, he came out and said what he was making, where the state had kept it under wraps. And so the execution of paying these millions of dollars to businesses and who's getting it and what's getting it seems to be the issue.
Well, the question is the results, right? I mean, we saw it in the Pitbull issue that there was a lack of transparency, and that one particular agency, Visit Florida, was hiding the ball. And when you're talking about taxpayer dollars, over $1 million paid to one performer, I think the expectations are that they're going to be transparent and they're going to be honest about the way that they think the government should be spending money.
Senator Brannen, a lot of people in the tourism industry, Florida's #1 industry, think that the money spent on Visit Florida is money well spent. It pays dividends. It brings people down here. How do you see it?
Yeah, I have to agree with them. I think being our #1 industry, we're competing with other states that spend money on marketing. I believe that the concept of marketing works. I think it's effective. I think it's a time-held tradition. And because it's our largest industry, and it's not something that we have a monopoly on, right? There's a beach in California, South Carolina, and all across Texas. There's sunshine all across the South. Yeah. So we have no monopoly on it. We have to do things to make ourselves look attractive.
There are, if I may, Glenna, there are some ways the money has been spent that you kind of think to yourself, what does this, how do you rationalize this? I mean, there was what? More than $1 million was spent, so a second league British soccer team wore signs on their uniforms that said Florida.
I agree about the transparency. I think, and I like the step of us going and not trying to eliminate. See, the speaker was saying eliminate, get rid of completely at first, and that's where I just disagreed. Transparency, I'm all for, and for us saying that there should be some accountability, but I think there's also some numbers that we look at, and since Visit Florida has started, we have seen an uptick in our tourism dollars.
Yeah, Representative, weigh in on that, because there are other states who provide a lot of incentive money, and although I know Governor Scott's argument is we've cut regulations, we have a very good environment for business, but there is competition for that business, and even, you know, just the film industry in Miami that's losing incentives, they're having issues with that. How do you answer that state competition argument?
Well, there is. I mean, that's a problem. In the abstract, if nobody was having incentive programs, it'd be an easy decision. Nobody would do them. But yeah, there's competition, absolutely. The good news is, on the tourism side, yeah, we're breaking records. This year, we had over 100 million visitors in Florida. But a big part of that is also because of the private sector. This year, Universal Studios, included a new Harry Potter ride that brings, hundreds and thousands of people to our state. Disney's upgrading their facilities, bringing Avatar and all these other, magnetic programs.
Do they get incentive money?
They're not getting incentive
At
money
all.
from Florida. They're doing it on their own. And that's part of the argument. When Visit Florida started, it was a private-public partnership that there was a one-to-one match between where they got their money and when the state reimbursed them. Now, the disparity is huge, and the state is forking over almost all their money, and that's probably not a great thing.
But people are coming to Disney or Universal because they market what they're doing. And that's why people come. That's what we're saying. We're trying to get people to come to Florida. We're trying to do the same thing, market what we're doing. The concept is in the private sector as well as the business, as well as the public sector.
But when you choose who gets those incentives, you're picking, as I heard someone say, winners and losers.
Winners and losers,
Yeah.
correct.
I mean, how do you tell the small business person who has worked so hard for decades building a business that he or she is not getting that money?
I would actually say that Visit Florida and Enterprise Florida are two different arguments. I would say that talking about money to market Florida, to tourism, which is our biggest industry, and these incentive programs are two different arguments, at least for me. I don't stray too far from saying it may just be considered corporate welfare when you do these incentive programs. But then I say, when you talk about tax cuts, it's almost the exact same thing. We're talking about apples to apples, whether you giving them something or whether you're just not taking it. So I want to hear the same conversation being held when we talk about eliminating the corporate tax, the commercial lease tax. All these things are doing the same thing, taking money away from our coffers here in Florida.
Yeah. Representative, let me kind of pull the focus back a little bit here. Talk about the tone of the upcoming session. March 7th is when you guys begin in Tallahassee. And I think that the assumption was many months ago, it was going to be smooth sailing. You got a Republican governor, you got a Republican controlled House, you've got a Republican controlled Senate. You are the Senate minority leader. And it has been anything but full smooth sailing. What's going on here?
Pep, you're not going to tell them it was smooth, right? It was planned to be smooth.
I don't think there was ever any expectation that it would be totally smooth. I think that, you have probably more happening at this point of committee meetings than you've ever had. I mean, we're swallowing water out of a fire hose, working on so many different issues. The Supreme Court has kicked out our workers' compensation system. A federal court has deemed that the exclusivity that we give the Seminoles in the gaming compact has been breached, and now we're in the process of reevaluating that. So there's a lot on the table that we need to look at, including the death penalty case and the fact that the Supreme Court has also thrown out a death penalty statute. So there's a lot that's at the table, and that creates tension.
Right, but are you not going to, you must pass a bill in both houses that says the death penalty must be unanimous because the courts have said you've got to do that.
We must, and we also have to pass a balanced budget. That's one of the requirements of our Constitution. So that creates strife. That creates a climate where the three parties, the House, the Senate, and the governor, are each going to try to use whatever leverage they have on this bill to affect that bill. And that's why you're starting to see these public arguments. Ultimately, I think everything's going to be okay, but there's just a lot to deal with this year.
I hope that everything is okay. But I will tell you, we really have to come together and respect each other before that happens.
The danger of having these kind of conversations about a legislative preview is there's so much to talk about.
Yeah.
So let's take a 2-minute break, and shall we come back?
Yes, we will.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back on the Sunday Morning Live in our studio. Our state representative, Jose Felix Diaz of Miami, State Senator Oscar Brannan. Let's talk, gentlemen, about gambling and whether it should be expanded or not. Senator Brannan, the view in the Senate is that it should be expanded to areas which have already had voters pass referendums saying we want slot machines. Representative, the House is much more conservative. It says, all right, the Seminoles can have craps and roulette for the next 20 years, but no more expansion.
Well, that's the first version of the bill. Last year, we started at a different place. We scaled it back because the Senate bill was so expansive. We had to be a little reactionary. But we do understand that there are many counties that continue to vote to expand gambling. We believe that we need to take that into consideration. But a compact is a deal between the state and a tribe, and the tribe, what they're paying for is exclusivity. Otherwise, they do not pay the state a dollar out of their proceeds.
$5 billion, isn't that what they agreed initially to pay the state?
Well,
over what?
Over 20 years, it would have been a $10 billion deal
billion.
last year.
Yeah.
And we're looking at the numbers now, but it's hard to justify those large numbers, a $3 billion guarantee over 7 years, if you have 15 new casinos.
And so, Senator, how do you take that and the fact that the Seminoles can take something like that to court and have taken it to court? I mean, where do you go with that?
Well, I think that one of the things that was said was some people passed referendums already. So if the people are saying that this is what we want, we're talking about slots, which we do now. That's already legal in Florida. That's legal in several counties. So there's an exclusivity as far as what the Seminoles want. And in our bill, it gives the Seminoles even more. So the argument of whether Florida is a gaming state or not is over. We're a gambling state. We gamble. They gamble here. They gamble in the casinos. So that happened. We have a state-sanctioned gambling in the lottery. So that's happening. So I don't really know about this whole contraction and trying to protect Florida.
Well, there are a lot of licenses that are active out there that are not being used, and people are squatting on them just in case something were to open up so that they too can get
and we pull those
slot
back in the
machines.
Senate bill.
All referendums are not created equal, and that's part of the problem here. Because there's no guarantee that they're going to get casinos, there's nobody actually going against these referendums when they come up for vote.
Senator, one of the top priorities of the Senate Majority Leader, that is Joe Negron of Stewart, who comes from an area that was devastated by all this terrible toxic algae from the lake, he wants to spend, what, $700 million of state money bonded out and buy 60,000 agricultural acres south of Lake Okeechobee for a huge reservoir water cleansing area so the water then flows cleanly into the Everglades and Florida Bay. Does that have a future?
Well, it's being discussed in the Senate because we're looking at the problem versus the solution suggested, just the solution suggested by the Senate president. We realize that that solution has a lot of hurdles, a lot of obstacles.
Yeah, big sugar is the main obstacle.
Has some unintended consequences. And so we're now starting to look at what are all of our options. Is it making sure that the dikes and levees are secure? Is it making sure that the water coming in is not as polluted? Is it looking at these deep water wells, deepening the wells that we are using the property that we already have south of the lake? So we're starting to discuss all options on the table because we realize there are some obstacles other than the whole big sugar. Sugar is an industry south of the lake, and there are people that work for them. That's also an issue for us.
So, but the question though is, if that doesn't have a future, then what does?
Then what does?
That South Florida's entire water
and
system
that's the
depends on
discussion
it.
right now.
Yeah.
If there is a real problem, if we don't have the support of the governor's office, if we don't have the support of the House, one of the things I learned early on in this process, two is more than one. And so in order to get something done, you have to find a solution. Yeah. The toxic green sludge is a serious problem. The salinity in Florida Bay are serious problems. Right. If the solution that is being suggested by the Senate doesn't seem to have life, we have to start looking at, well, what is a solution? Because we have to find a solution to this.
Representative, I asked House Speaker Richard Corcoran a number of weeks ago when I interviewed him, how does he look at spending the Amendment 2 money, which voters approved, by what, 70%? The money is there to do this. He was kind of tepid. He said, well, we'll look at it. He didn't commit yay or nay.
Well, we've been spending the money, and we've been trying to beautify our springs. We have some of the most beautiful springs in the world, and we've had to clean those up the last few years. We've put additional dollars into Everglades restoration, so it's not like we're not complying with the will of the voters. It's just a matter of seeing whether or not we're in agreement with the senator as to what the plan should be for what happens south of the lake.
Yeah, I should correct myself, thank you. It was Amendment 1 on the 2012 ballot? 2012.
I knew what you meant. I knew what you meant.
Well, thank you.
The
I know you did.
answer is consistent with that. Yeah, it wasn't the medical marijuana amendment,
Right.
which is a different story altogether, and we can talk about that too.
And voters overwhelmingly voted to spend money for land conservation.
And that's what we need to do. Like, honestly, I mean, when the voters say something, which kind of goes back to my gaming point, voters are asking for it. That's kind of how democracy is set up. That's what we need to do. And it probably was not meant for administrative fees. It was not meant for, I mean, as much as people want to do things that might help us buy land, like septic tanks and replacement of septic tanks, that's not what that money was for. That money was for us to buy land for the purpose of making Florida more beautiful.
Once again, there are bills that have been introduced by Representative Greg Steube, I believe, from Sarasota, that would make open carry the law of Florida. Anybody who has a concealed weapons permit could carry a gun openly on a campus, on a college, in government meetings. Is that going to pass?
It hasn't passed yet, and he's a senator now.
Senator.
So the difference between
my second mistake this morning.
The difference between Senator Steube and Representative Steube is that Representative Steube was limited to 6 bills. Senator Steube does not have a bill limit.
64.
So I think he has
64
60 plus bills.
I printed them out. There's 2 dozen of them.
And most of them are gun bills. He's the son of a sheriff. This is an issue that's very important to his district. Obviously, some of it doesn't take into account some of our urban concerns versus rural concerns, and that's why the process exists to allow every issue to be vetted one by one.
Last word on the gun bills?
I think it's going to have a big problem. I just don't see its path to any of those 67 bills. And I'm just playing the 7 or 8 gun bills he has. We've been breaking them up. I think they still have a problem. I think the urban concerns, as Pepe pointed out, versus the rural concerns is a big issue.
All right. Senator Brannan, great to have you come in. Representative Diaz, thanks very much. Appreciate it. All right, coming up, we're going to take this and so much more to the round table.